My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way that we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to follow and subscribe. And today on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting a real sourcing wizard, someone who boasts over 20 years of experience in sourcing, currently working as the head of global sourcing at Oatly, Jonas Spannel. Jonas, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sam. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you on. Now, Oatly is a real innovator and a titan of dairy alternatives in Europe, as you and I know, being in Sweden. But for those listeners that don't know much about Oatly out there, would you mind quickly introducing what makes Oatly special?
So, Oatly has actually a long background. It goes back 25 years, starting with the innovation of making a drink. I avoid using the word milk here, drink directly from some type of grain. And in the end, it started with oats. So after a kind of long period of tagging along and not being really able to launch this to the great public, this idea, it took off in 2012 under new management, the current Oatly you know today. And I would say that was 2012, 10 years ago. And I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, it has really taken off with the global expansion. And the core of the proposition is to have a plant-based alternative to dairy, basically, and also offer a very sustainable solution. So that's a kind of the core of the Oatly message and product. Yeah.
Great. And for those of you listening in that don't know about Oatly, it's a fantastic alternative to dairy, and they have some awesome oat drinks. So go out and try it if you haven't before. And we're going to talk a little bit about growth and what that means for somebody sitting in your position a little bit later in the episode. But I'd love to start with a question that we ask a lot of our guests, Jonas. As a head of global sourcing and somebody that's been working in sourcing for years and years, what exactly does sourcing and procurement mean to you?
Yes, as you know, there are many different terms used: sourcing, procurement, purchasing, call off, buying, a lot of different terms. And the term I prefer to use and what I have been working with is what I call strategic sourcing. And what that means is that you establish and maintain a supplier base that can deliver what the company needs at the correct terms and at the correct quality. And in Oatly's case, also sustainability. And and I have a specific model for that. I think I stole it somewhere, but I can't remember where. So now I have made it my own.
Steal with pride, as they say, Jonas.
Yes.
Yeah, shamelessly.
And this is what I call the Kiwi bird model.
Okay.
So if you don't know what the Kiwi bird is, you can Google it now, and you will see that's a small flightless bird from New Zealand, about the size of a chicken. But that's not the important part. The important part is what the Kiwi bird looks like. And the Kiwi bird model, which is represented then by the shape of this bird, is basically in 3 different parts. The first part is represented by the body of the bird. And that is your everyday go-to supplier base for you have a project, in our case, some kind of new recipe for a new product, or if you would do something else, you have that. You go to that supplier base and you can find basically everything from your established supplier base, and you can just add business to those suppliers. The second part of the model is represented by the long beak of the bird, right? So that represents new technology or new innovation. And suppliers that are positioned in the beak, those are the suppliers that you go to for that innovation. They can later become part of the first part, the body, as you develop the business with them, and maybe they have more products down the line. And then the third question is, the next question, what's the third part of the model?
Right.
Then people usually say the legs, which can represent all the legwork that the sourcing organization does, but that's not the case.
Okay.
It's the lack of a tail. So,
Okay.
yes, most organizations specifically come in to an organization, they have a huge tail of suppliers that you have been
Right.
using for a long time. No one really likes them. They're expensive. They have bad service, but no one has the energy to remove them because they've been there all the time. So
Right.
that's the third part, to actively cut down the tail. So
Okay.
and that's the kind of essence of my view of strategic sourcing. If you have control over these items in your supplier base, and again, the right terms, the right call, then you're good.
A fantastic model that I think a lot of anyone listening could be able to be inspired by. I'm curious. I mean, to maybe get away from some of the set questions that we have for today, but by what you just said there, how has Oatly actively worked with reducing the tail spend?
So this is an ongoing process, right?
Of course, of
Yeah,
course.
yes. And I think you will find most of the tail in the indirect space,
Yeah,
right? So with direct, I mean the kind of the items and the suppliers that directly into the product.
sure.
In our case, oats and ingredient types of ingredients, right? And here we have also found some suppliers that have been tagging along for a long time that really meet the new cost requirements that we have, so we cut them out. But for a general company, I would say you would find the majority of your tail spend in the indirect space.
Hmm.
We have seen examples, at Oatly and also other companies I worked for, where a stakeholder somewhere in the company has been ordering from the same supplier that he's known
Right,
for 20 years, and
right.
there's a lot of stakeholder management involved in that to move away from that supplier. And it's a 2-hour job to just find another one and reduce your cost and increase the service. We had a number of examples with that with Oatly as well.
So is consolidation the primary strategy there, or is it primarily reallocation? I mean,
Not necessarily. I think sometimes consolidation is overused as a kind of how to say
kind of
Alexander
sweeping
strike,
terms. Yeah,
to
yeah,
fix
yeah,
things.
yeah,
That's not really
yeah.
the case. You have to look into each and every case. In many cases, when you have a company that is immature in that sense, it's just a look
Right.
at the individual suppliers.
Mm, mm.
Consolidation is not a purpose in itself, is what I mean. You have to look
Yeah.
at the
No,
individual business case. Yes.
I hear you. I hear you. That's a good way of looking at it as well, because it treats the supplier individually. It allows you as a business to focus in on what is the real goal, and the real goal is to delete is to remove as much of the tail end as possible.
Yes.
And each individual supplier will have its own unique case. So I think that that's good tips. I was looking a little bit through your LinkedIn page prior to the episode today, and I see that you actually started your career in sales. What is it that exactly made you shift to focus in the field of procurement and sourcing?
I have to admit it was more of a coincidence.
Okay, all right,
Life takes you in different directions. Many small steps builds up a whole life. So, but I would say I was never really comfortable in sales.
okay,
My friend, he said that if you don't go to work every day saying, "Oh, I really want to make these sales calls," you should not work in sales. So
no, probably not.
yes, and I shifted over to sourcing, and sourcing offers, very interesting challenges and personal development in business and technology and all other things
Mm,
for the maybe not so extrovert person. So yeah, it was
understood.
more a coincidence, but I felt more at home there, you can say.
Instead, you have to deal with salespeople trying to sell you all day long, huh?
Yes, which maybe we will come back to later. Yes. So,
I,
but
I- you know,
it's a good experience to have worked in sales and then go over to sourcing because you
yeah.
know how the other person thinks and where his red lines are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we typically say it. We're selling ourselves at Kodiak Hub a service to professional buyers for professional buyers, and sourcing and procurement teams aren't always used to buying things for themselves. With that being said, I think that we've picked the wrong target group to enter into negotiations with, because it never winds up to be the funnest part of contracting for us, right? I'm curious though. There's talk of a gap between procurement and sales. A lot of businesses speak of this particular gap that exists. How, from your experience, somebody that's worked on both sides of the table, do you think that procurement and sales can be able to bridge the gaps that there are?
Yes, I think so. And I think as a buyer, if I look at myself, you can actively work with that as well. I
Mm,
think there's two aspects. One is the in your own company, right? What
right.
is the status kind of pecking order between sales and sourcing? Normally, sales come up on top, to be honest. But
Right.
if you can close that gap and in your own organization elevate sales, because one fundamental truth is that the seller, the key account manager, he or
Mm,
she will call the person he or she thinks makes the decision.
right.
So if sourcing has a role in the decision making, we can influence how it works, right? Um, the other part is between me as a buyer and and the seller. I think here both parties must strive to understand what is important for the other party.
Mm,
I have had cases where you quickly get caught up in standpoints, right?
right.
And using the word unacceptable. I think this is very interesting. The word unacceptable. This is unacceptable for me to reduce the price. Okay, what does it mean? You don't accept it, then we walk away and we don't do any business anymore because it's unacceptable.
Because there is no acceptance criteria if both parties are focused on value, right,
Yeah, yes.
and
And they
collaboration.
focus on their standpoints, right? So
Right.
what I
Right.
can do, or what I do as a sourcing person, is I explain to my counterpart or partner, we like to say, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no. So this is important for me, and I want to understand what is important for you. This is a key in a kind of negotiation strategy that I use called happy happy, that you need to understand that how that you can close the gap, right? If you just coordinate your standpoints, you will start. That's easy. Everyone can do that.
Yeah.
Sit in a meeting and repeat standpoints. I can bring a person from the street in to just repeat my standpoints, right? It's not
Sure.
difficult. What is
Yeah.
difficult is trying to bridge the gap by really understanding what is
Mm,
important for the other party. And that I
mm.
think you can work actively with as a buyer with the seller to close that gap.
Some really great practical and operational tips. So I thank you for that as well. It's important that we get to the core of some of those things during these episodes when we can as well. I'm curious. You have a long-standing career, which I saw, previous to coming to Oatly at Sony. I'm curious, what particular experiences have you taken from that space, that industry, but also that business, and applied them in your role at Oatly?
So I think regardless of business, if it's food or if it's tech or whatever, I think many of the
Mm,
same principles appears for a sourcing organization. And
sure.
I like to take the standpoint that sourcing is a support organization.
Mm,
And if the internal stakeholders that you have to work actively with, if they see that you add value and support them, they will invite you into your organization.
mm,
And if they do that, that leads to the most important thing for a sourcing organization is to come in early.
right.
I think every sourcing person that listens to this have experienced that the internal stakeholder comes and say, we have been talking to supplier A, and they have this thing that we really, really like, and we told them that, and they have told us the price is $100, but we have not negotiated anything, so we'd like you to come in now and negotiate this.
Right.
And
Right.
then it's too late, right? I can't do anything. So, but once
And
the
doesn't
sig-
that
yeah,
maybe circle back a bit because you don't know because then you're a bit in the dark as to what is the value, right?
yes,
You haven't been a part of that definition of requirements or alike. So I think that it's a very important point, right?
and when the stakeholder understands that you can bring value by coming in early and understand the requirements and help them, they invite you then. That's why I use the support organization to have that approach.
Is that something that you bring previous experience from it at Sony, that sourcing and procurement bridged that gap and came in earlier in discussions to not be seen, so to say, as such a more so what's the word I'm looking for, transactional role, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And come in and create your role in the organization, that we can do more than just place a PO or
Right.
draft a contract. We can actually provide value, whether it's the R&D organization that
Right.
needs a new supplier or ingredient, or is the engineering that needs something.
Right.
It's that we can come in and provide value, and by presenting it as a support organization, that's the way
Mm.
in for us.
Mm. There's this kind of ongoing debate: is procurement primary or secondary within the broader value chain? Right. If you look at like kind of the value chain models of yesterday, which I would say in most cases still stand today. The interesting thing that I think that you put your finger on there is it doesn't really matter whether the procurement organization can both be support a secondary function or a primary function, as long as is a supporting function that's able to impact early, right? I think
Yes.
that's it's an enablement function in a lot of organizations, and when you as a business are enabled, or as a procurement organization are enabled to enable, that's when the real magic happens, I think.
Yes.
um I'm curious because Oatly is a business that's been experiencing high growth during the last years, but also sustainability and responsibility stands at the core of your guys' sourcing organization. I mean, in your opinion, what type of role does a sourcing organization play in that type of a high growth environment, and also what role does your sourcing organization play in creating growth?
So, if you look at any high growth company, I've done, I think Oatly is like my third, I think, high growth journey
Yeah.
that I've done, and it's the same thing happens all the time. So I think one of the key for me as a strategic sourcing manager is to make sure that we have material supply
Mm,
availability,
mm,
again at the right terms and at the right quality and right sustainability requirements specific of
mm,
Oatly, to make sure, and that go back to the scalable supplier base.
mm.
So and when it comes to material availability, we always work behind the scenes, kind of. We're kind of the boring side. Material availability is assumed to be there all the time, right?
Right.
Yes. If sales goes down, oh, it's a market thing. We can't do anything. But as soon as there's a material supply, it's a disaster. So our
Mm,
job is to
mm.
prevent that disaster, the role, and that's what we do. So and again, going back to my little Kiwi bird here, making sure that you have a scalable supplier base,
Right. Right.
so that the suppliers that we have, together with innovation or engineering or whoever's the internal stakeholders that we work together with, that we have made sure that we don't have any built-in limitations for the growth, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we contribute. And of course, everyday work is one thing to fix problems, but that's the key, to have that scalability. It sounds really simple, but it's not that simple.
Well, do you have any practical tips as to how people can reach scale with suppliers?
I have this rule of thumb, which is a rule of thumb, which means it doesn't always apply,
Right.
is that don't source from a company with less than 100 employees.
Mm,
And why do I say that? Because those companies are normally dependent on one or two key experts.
mm,
And if they leave the company, then you sit there and you have a big problem. I've had
mm.
that experience a number of times. So it's a rule of thumb. So I like to work with, it tends to be that, you know, suppliers that are a little bit larger, they have more capacity. So if you really need to scale the business, which has
Right.
been the case here, right? You need
Right.
to make sure that you don't select suppliers that have this built-in limitations, because internal stakeholders, specifically
Mm.
R&D organizations, they tend to look only at the technical requirements, which
Right.
is their job. So my job is then come in, okay, but we also have these other availability aspects that we need to look at. So
Mm.
that's how I do it.
And I think that sourcing in an organization like yours has to be very holistic in your approach. So like you said, availability is one aspect of that. The capacity, the capability, the price, the quality. But you also have talked about the sustainability aspect, and I know that it's an incredibly important aspect to Oatly's brand. How do you guys, as a sourcing organization, work with responsible sourcing and continue to keep it at the kind of core of your business without also sacrificing any type of profit margins? Or maybe you do. So you tell me.
Yeah, it's so if we start with the organizational, so we call it sustainable sourcing. So I'll use that term. So
Okay. Yeah.
what we did is that we decided to, as we took off on the kind of high growth, to integrate the sustainable sourcing. So we had the sustainability department, sourcing department, and then we had specific experts in sustainable sourcing, and we
Right.
decided to integrate them. So we had the category-based strategic sourcing. So we
Sure.
decided to uh, take these sustainable sourcing expert and integrate them into the category work, bring them closer to the commercial. Though we have the commercial teams and the quality teams and the
Mm,
sustainability working together as one
mm.
category team. That's very important. Bring them
So
closer in.
sourcing becomes one stream of work rather
Yes,
than separate needs or wants or requirements on the supplier base. Then.
yes. I think every company that work with commercial sustainability, and they have that, but we maybe in separate department, but we integrate them into the same.
And how have you seen that maybe impact your organization positively?
It solves the first problem by having them closer integrated, making sure that the information sharing works better by having
Yeah.
them in the same team under the same management.
Mm,
Myself,
mm,
it also increases the cross-functional knowledge.
mm,
If I'm the commercial person, I'm a commercial specialist, and I have worked together with a sustainability specialist. I also become more knowledgeable as a
mm.
commercial person, which helps the interaction. I understand when I need to seek advice from the sustainability expert, and vice versa, and what the different trade-offs also can be.
Mm. Great tips. You've already provided us with some really great concrete tips, but on the topic of sustainable sourcing, as it is, continuously becoming more and more important in organizations. I mean, you look at EU legislation that's being proposed right now, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Do you have any additional concrete tips that you could provide other than integrate the organizations underneath one umbrella to maybe enhance more sustainable sourcing practices?
Yeah, maybe I can mention two. One is again obvious but very important, is to have clear and documented policies with revision control.
Right.
Right, that
Yeah.
is very very important. So you know
Mm.
exactly, okay, which requirements are valid and are they updated, for example, against the latest EU legislation or something
Yes.
like
And like
that.
you said, obvious yet very important and not always done. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And the other one is, I feel like it's important to have dedicated resources for sustainability.
Mm.
Um, it's maybe unfair to say that sustainability is new, but at least it's more new than quality and commercial. I think it's very important to have those experts. Like I said, we integrated them into the organization to have them, you know, right next to us, if you say. So that's very important. That you need to have experts on this.
Yeah. Okay. Great tips. I'm curious. If we circle back to kind of where we started about high growth environments, leading a team in that type of environment can be challenging for anyone. And I'm sure that you've, had your share of successes, but also challenges along the way. I'm curious, how do you ensure, as the head of global sourcing, that you're bringing in the correct talent during a phase of high growth?
I think it's a very, very good question.
Thank you.
the one experience I've had, and I also have other people share the same experience, is that if you have rapid growth, about maybe 20-25% of your hires are the wrong
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
You make mistakes in the hiring process. It's 2020,
Yeah.
quite a lot actually.
Yeah.
So
It's a lot.
yeah, so I strongly recommend that when you're in high growth and you really need to find that, you use search.
Yeah.
That you have a search function. If you have an external company or you have your own talent acquisition, that actually do go out there and look. Because if you work more traditionally in high growth, you put up an ad, 200 people apply and try to select, you don't really get the expert. You want to get the people who are the experts but are not actively working, looking for another job, and just not attracted by a brand, right?
Right.
So that's my core tip, to do that investment in search. Then you save money in the end because you cut the 20-25% of recruitment gone wrong, and you get the right people from the start. So
Yeah,
that's
and we know time is money, and when hires don't work out, the costs can be accrued from anywhere. There's estimations that it's between 10 to 20,000 euro, or 20,000 euro for each hire that doesn't work out. That's so rather put that on the talent acquisition. It's a good tip for sure. In different literature that I've seen, Oatly speaks about the oat cult as being part of a team or family, so to speak. How do you, as a sourcing leader, ensure that you don't, sacrifice culture during times of high growth, and also in a remote environment, as well as I'm sure that the business is probably shifting back to being in the office a bit, but everybody's kind of in this hybrid environment nowadays.
yeah. So here, behind that Oatly cult, as you say, is there's very, very firm internal guidance on this, which is helping. So that's my
Mm,
first part of the answer, and I'll explain that a little bit. And then my second part would be kind of just a general leadership philosophy about how managing a well-functioning team. And in Oatly, we have company guiding principles. Every company has this, but I think they are specifically very, very high on the agenda for us. So I think that's really,
yeah.
really good. I have my overall sourcing philosophy, which I described how to source in high growth with a Kiwi bird, which is a model, right? And again, clear and documented policies and procedure. That's the base, right? We can
Mm,
find some safety in those documents that we have: code of conduct, sustainability requirements, quality requirements. We have specific framework documents around sustainability that we use as a base, right? So
mm,
that's the foundation. And then I think for any team that I have managed over my history here, is that if you can have three things, you know, they need to feel that they belong to a unit,
mm.
right? The team has to feel that they're sometimes unique. Only we can do it.
Yeah,
And the third part is have some fun, right? If those three things can be achieved,
yeah.
then the team will do anything, right? So, so that's just kind of how we manage it.
I think that the aspect of fun is forgotten
Yeah.
so often, right? We work with heavy things. You guys work with buying materials and services that are going towards an oat drink, and yes, that's the product on the shelf, but it's also a big and pretty important supply chain behind it, right?
Yes.
That's making it seem so simple. So it's important to not forget that you guys, that you can have fun in procurement and sourcing as well,
Yes.
even though it's a serious topic. Um, if you could provide, one tip uh, to Jonas of 20 years ago, who was just starting out as a strategic buyer, at Sony, what would you tell him?
If I can give only one tip, I would say the essence is to never to compromise your long-term credibility for short-term gains.
Mm.
If the supplier partner trusts you, they will give you what you need. The long-term credibility is the most important. Short-term gains often can lead to a mistrust, and then you have basically ruined your relationship. So long-term credibility is the most important.
Fantastic insights. And Jonas, we thank you again for being on today's episode of The Way We Source. We want to round out with a little bit of a lighter note. And I thank you so much for all the insights that you shared. We typically round off our episodes with our little Kodiak moment. As you remember, the famous camera band Kodak, they had the Kodak moment where it was a special moment that was captured in time forever. And now we're going to get to capture our special moment together with a little quick fire round, if that's okay. So the listeners get to not only know Jonas, head of global sourcing at Oatly, but also Jonas, the person, if that's okay with you. So some quick fire questions. One word to one sentence answers, and we'll try and keep it quick and short, but also fun. So the first question: if you have one book that you're recommending, what would it be? Fiction, nonfiction. It could be related to professional aspects or leisurely reading.
I would select the book "Let Me In" by Ajvide. It's called "Låt den rätte komma in" Swedish. So it's a book it's a story about a boy that kind of befriends a vampire.
Okay.
It sounds, but it's a very that's the one.
Cool. If you're going to have one drink or dish made with oat drink of Oatly, what would that be?
I would have it as a coffee, as a how do you say, latte. I don't have latte.
Yeah.
Cappuccino. Yes.
And Oatly makes a barista
Yes.
form that's
Yes.
fantastic as well. It's a little bit foamy. I love that. Cool. I'm coming over for dinner tomorrow night. As we say in Swedish, pradrätt, your dish that you would definitely impress with. What would you serve for dinner?
I would serve you some fish that I have found at my local fish mongler here.
Yes.
Probably with some white wine sauce and cauliflower puree.
Oh, all right. Sounds lovely. And well, if things don't work out, in sourcing, you always might have a future career in a Michelin restaurant. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe. I don't think so,
All
but
right.
yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe stick to sourcing.
Yeah, stick to sourcing. Probably best bet. Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Jonas, for all of your great insights, your models, your generosity for sharing with our users, our listeners today. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. If people want to get in touch with you or reach out, where could they do so?
Okay, it's I say there's both disadvantage and advantage with having an unusual name. So you can easily find me on LinkedIn, Jonas Bonell. Yeah.
Super. Thanks so much, Jonas. And we appreciate you being on today's episode and wish you and the team at Oatly the best of luck in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.